Rain-slicked cobblestones gleamed under the dim glow of the street lamps, their reflections trembling with every gust of wind. In the shadows of a narrow alley in Brussels, Marianne Dupont moved with deliberate calm, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she clutched a small envelope. Inside were the papers that could decide the fate of thousands, or her own. She looked ordinary, brown hair tucked beneath a faded scarf, a modest coat buttoned up against the chill, eyes downcast. But ordinary appearances had been her greatest weapon. At the edge of the square, a German officer in full uniform waited. His gaze swept the street like a predator's, sharp and unforgiving. Marianne's heart pounded, each beat echoing the danger she had danced with for months. She approached him slowly, forcing a polite, measured smile. "For you, Herr Oberleutnant," she said softly, sliding the envelope across the table of a nearby cafe. He took it, eyes flicking to hers with suspicion. "And this information?" he asked, voice low, controlled. "Yes," she replied, her throat tight. "Important troop movements. Strategic positions you might find helpful." As he flipped the envelope open, Marianne kept her face neutral, hiding the exhilaration and terror coiling in her chest. Every letter, every number inside was false, a web of carefully crafted deception. If even a single misstep occurred, if the Germans doubted her loyalty, her life would end before nightfall. Yet here she was, a young woman no one would suspect, steering the enemy toward illusions while shielding her countrymen. Around her, the city moved oblivious to the hidden war unfolding in plain sight. Mothers carried shopping baskets, children laughed in puddles, and street vendors shouted over the drizzle. None of them could imagine that within the ordinary, extraordinary acts of courage were being performed by people like Marianne, women who walked unnoticed yet held secrets capable of toppling empires. A sudden tension sliced through the air. A German radio operator nearby frowned, tuning his device with a puzzled look. Marianne's stomach twisted. He had intercepted a coded message meant for another member of her network, one that now could expose everything. Sweat pricked her brow as the officer glanced up, sensing something, questioning. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her coat. One misstep, one flicker of hesitation, and the entire network, months in the making, could unravel in a heartbeat. Marianne forced her composure, nodding politely as the officer pocketed the false intelligence. She walked back into the shadows, her mind racing. The enemy had just brushed against their secret, closer than ever before. The network of women she worked with, teachers, nurses, clerks, all ordinary faces with extraordinary courage, was now teetering on the brink of discovery. And somewhere, in the murmur of the rain and the whispers of the city, the first thread of danger had been pulled. Tonight, the hunt had begun. In the quiet corners of cafes, in the back rooms of shops, and in the halls of university lecture theatres, a secret was quietly taking shape. It began with whispers, brief encounters where trust was measured in glances rather than words. Ordinary women whose days were filled with tending to families, studying or serving customers, were being recruited into a network that would defy every expectation. They were nurses who patched wounds in silence, students who scribbled notes under the watchful eyes of occupying forces, and shopkeepers who hid messages in the folds of fabric and behind counters. Each woman joined for her own reason, but all understood the stakes. Marianne Dupont remembered the day she was approached. A fellow nurse had handed her a folded scrap of paper in the laundry room of the hospital. It was an invitation, cryptic yet unmistakable. "You have eyes no one suspects," it said, "and hands that can guide history." The choice was immediate and terrifying. To say yes meant leaving behind a life of safety and certainty. To refuse could mean betrayal of her country. The sacrifices were immense. Some left husbands and children behind, fearing that even a whisper from home could jeopardize their mission. Others assumed new identities entirely, learning to lie convincingly, to erase themselves from the lives they once knew. Every moment outside the network's meetings was a performance, casual, ordinary, unremarkable. But behind closed doors, they trained themselves in secret codes, practiced smuggling intelligence through impossible channels, and studied the German operations with meticulous precision. There was Sophie, the university student who could encode messages with the subtlety of a poet. Claudine, the shopkeeper, who knew every route, every alley, every hidden corner where packages could vanish without a trace. And Elise, the nurse, whose knowledge of medical procedures allowed her to move through checkpoints unnoticed, carrying intelligence under the guise of supplies. Each skill was invaluable, and together they formed a tapestry of resistance woven from courage and cunning. Yet, ingenuity alone was not enough. To remain undetected, they had to anticipate suspicion, mislead observers, and vanish in plain sight. A casual smile, a well-timed delivery, a whispered word in the marketplace. Each action could conceal or reveal their purpose. Lives balanced on a knife edge every day, yet they persisted. The network thrived not because of brute force, but because of subtlety, cleverness, and an unshakable resolve to outsmart an enemy who never suspected the power of the women surrounding them. In the shadow of occupation, ordinary women became extraordinary. Their courage was quiet, invisible to the world around them, yet each act of bravery echoed far beyond the streets they walked. Every message delivered, every secret hidden, and every life risked was a testament to their resolve, a resolve that would soon face its greatest test. The early morning mist clung to the streets like a shroud, muffling footsteps and swallowing shapes in its grey haze. Marianne Dupont adjusted her scarf, hiding the lower half of her face, and glanced at the envelope tucked securely inside her coat. Inside was intelligence that could alter the course of the war, troop movements, factory schedules, and the location of German supply convoys. Every detail had been painstakingly verified, every code carefully embedded, yet the danger of discovery hung over her like a blade. Her path took her through narrow alleys and abandoned courtyards, places the Germans assumed were empty, but which the network knew like the back of their hands. A patrol appeared at the end of the street, two officers moving slowly, rifles slung across their shoulders, eyes scanning every shadow. Marianne froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. She ducked into a doorway, pressing herself flat against the wall, heart threatening to give her away. The patrol passed, oblivious, and she exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Every mission was a dance with death, every step measured, every decision potentially fatal. Marianne's mind flickered to Sophie, who would be waiting on the other side of the city with instructions for the next phase. The women had perfected a system that allowed them to operate without ever meeting openly. Coded letters disguised as shopping lists, packages hidden in laundry, messages sewn into hems, every item a potential lifeline. Dead drops in abandoned lots or behind loose bricks in the walls of public buildings became lifelines in a war fought in whispers and shadows. Each member played a role, like pieces in an invisible puzzle, moving in silence to create a map of resistance that the Germans could not see. At the train station, Marianne had her next close call. A man in a long coat lingered too long, eyes sweeping over the travelers with a predatory patience. She recognized him, not an officer but a civilian collaborator, a man whose allegiance to the Reich was known in whispers. She adjusted her posture, pretending to tie her shoe, pretending to fumble with her basket, pretending to be nothing but a distracted passerby. The man's gaze lingered, suspicion prickling along her spine. Then slowly, deliberately, he moved on. She exhaled, the weight of her relief almost too heavy to bear. Inside a quiet cafe, she met Claudine. No words were spoken, no papers changed hands. Instead, a cup of coffee was placed on the table, and beneath it, tucked into the saucer, lay the next set of instructions, coded yet simple to a trained eye. Marianne's hands shook slightly as she retrieved the note. The code was elegant in its simplicity, yet the consequences of failure were unimaginable. One mistranslated number, one misread word, and not just her life but the lives of dozens of women could be lost. Even in these fleeting moments, the strain was relentless. Fear had become a constant companion, paranoia a necessity. Every glance from a uniformed man, every stranger who lingered too long, set off alarms in the mind, each one accompanied by the mental checklist. Is the package safe? Has the message been delivered? Who could be watching? The women of the network learned to live with this tension as their daily reality. Their nerves stretched taut like bowstrings, ready to snap at any moment. Yet despite the danger, there was brilliance in their operations. Marianne watched a German convoy turn sharply down a side street, following the false intelligence they had planted weeks ago. A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips, not out of arrogance, but relief. Every step of the deception worked. Every thread of the web tightened around the enemy, drawing them ever deeper into a maze they could not escape. The network's cleverness was its weapon, their invisibility its shield, and their courage the mortar that held it all together. As night fell over the city, the mist returned, thick and suffocating. Marianne ducked into a narrow alley, counting her steps and checking the envelope one last time. Somewhere beyond the street lamps, the radio crackled faintly with German static. Messages intercepted by collaborators, patterns noticed by the occupiers, each one a potential trap, each one a reminder that the net of danger was closing. The web they had so carefully spun, the network they had built from shadows, now demanded perfection. One misstep, one overlooked detail, and all of it could unravel in an instant. Marianne's fingers lingered on the envelope, her heart thrumming with a mix of fear and determination. The mission had been completed, but the war of wits, of courage, and of survival had only grown more intricate. In the quiet of the streets, she knew the network would continue, expanding and adapting, each woman playing her part in a game where the stakes were nothing less than life and death. Tonight, the enemy had been fooled once more, but the pressure, the fear, and the ever-present threat of exposure would not allow them to rest. The web tightened, and with it the shadows deepened. The night was unusually still, the streets of Brussels swallowed by a heavy fog that muted even the most determined footsteps. Inside a small apartment tucked above a shuttered bakery, Marianne Dupont sat with Sophie and Claudine, their faces pale under the dim glow of a single lamp. The envelope in Marianne's hands had been delivered, as always, with precision. But this time, something was wrong. A coded message that should have reached another member of the network had instead been intercepted. A collaborator had seen it, or worse, a trusted contact had broken. Marianne's stomach twisted as the implications sank in. If a single woman had faltered, even momentarily, the Germans would begin connecting the dots. Entire missions, meticulously planned and executed over months, could collapse overnight. Sophie's hands trembled as she unfolded her copy of the intercepted note. "It's traced back to us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone inside. Someone we trusted." The words hung in the room like smoke, suffocating in their gravity. Marianne's mind raced, trying to calculate the fallout. One compromised mission could cost lives, not just their own, but those of couriers, informants, even civilians unwittingly caught in the crossfire. Claudine's eyes darted toward the window, toward the street below. "They're watching," she said flatly. "If they already know, they'll move fast. We have hours, maybe less." The three women exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken fear. Trust, once the network's greatest asset, now seemed fragile as the papers hidden in their coats and drawers. The betrayal forced them into action. Each member had to assume new roles, changing routines to avoid patterns that could reveal more of their operations. Dead drops had to be rerouted, coded messages rewritten, and safe houses relocated at a moment's notice. Even a casual movement, buying groceries, delivering laundry, passing a neighbor in the hallway, was a potential trap. Their ordinary lives had become a gauntlet. Marianne recalled the look in the eyes of a German officer during a previous mission, the cold precision of suspicion, the way it could strip a person bare in an instant. Now that gaze seemed to hover over them, even unseen. Every knock at the door, every shadow across the street became a question mark. Who could be trusted? Who had faltered? The tension was relentless, gnawing at nerves, fraying resolve, and then came the first devastating proof of the breach. One of the network's couriers had been captured near the docks. Claudine had learned it through a whispered warning from a sympathetic porter. Details were scarce. Interrogation had begun. Names might be forced from her under duress. Every operation they had carried out, every misdirected convoy, every sabotage mission, now risked exposure. The network was no longer only fighting the German occupiers. It was battling the corrosive fear of betrayal within its own ranks. Yet even in the shadow of despair, the women found clarity in their purpose. Marianne, Sophie, and Claudine moved quickly, relying on the skills that had kept them alive until now. Marianne rewrote the next set of codes herself, adding an extra layer of deception. Sophie devised alternate delivery routes, ensuring the next message would never pass the same hands. Claudine coordinated with trusted contacts in the city, moving intelligence in ways designed to confuse, mislead, and protect the compromised member. The human cost of betrayal was unrelenting. Nights were sleepless, filled with imagined footsteps outside windows. Paranoia gnawed at their minds. Simple gestures, a glance from a neighbor, a polite question from a shopkeeper, became potential threats. Even the bond between the women, forged in courage and secrecy, was tested by doubt and fear. Yet it was precisely this bond that held the network together. Each of them understood that fear could not paralyze them. Action, no matter how small, was the only shield against disaster. As dawn broke, pale and fragile, Marianne looked out over the city, the rooftops slick with rain. The betrayal had changed everything. The network had been forced to adapt, to become faster, smarter, and more cautious than ever before. One misstep could mean death. One act of bravery could mean survival. The stakes had never been higher. The enemy had glimpsed their secret, but the network would not be undone. In the shadows of betrayal, the women tightened their defenses, prepared for the next move, and resolved to protect one another at all costs. Trust was fragile, fear was constant, but courage, quiet, relentless, and defiant, would carry them through. For now, survival was the mission. The next battle, both against the Germans and the shadows of doubt, was already beginning. The night was alive with quiet purpose. Marianne Dupont adjusted her scarf once more, blending into the shadows of the empty street. Tonight was not just another delivery, not just another coded message. It was the culmination of months of planning, the moment where the network would directly outsmart the German occupiers. Operation Deception was underway, and the stakes could not have been higher. Inside a dimly lit apartment on the edge of the city, Sophie and Claudine laid out the tools of their craft. False maps were carefully folded, annotated with strategic troop positions that never existed. Supply routes were drawn with meticulous precision, designed to lure German forces into chasing shadows. Notes were disguised as personal letters, innocuous and ordinary in appearance, yet containing instructions so clever they could manipulate entire battalions. Each member assumed a role, each movement choreographed with the precision of a military operation. Marianne's task was to deliver the key map to a German officer stationed near the train depot. Sophie had arranged for the officer to witness what seemed like civilian activity, workers loading crates, a staged argument over directions, and the deliberate placement of another false message at a nearby dead drop. Claudine coordinated surveillance, keeping track of patrols, collaborators, and the faint hum of German radios in the distance. Marianne moved through the streets with measured calm, her every step a calculated decision. The officer was waiting, and she had to appear casual, ordinary, unremarkable. The envelope in her hands contained intelligence that was entirely fabricated, but crafted to be irresistible. If the Germans followed it, they would waste time, divert resources, and leave gaps that the Allied forces could exploit. Her pulse raced as she approached the officer, a polite smile on her lips, a flicker of doubt in her mind. One misstep, one hesitation, and the ruse could collapse. At the depot, the officer examined the map with increasing interest, murmuring orders into his radio, moving troops based on the false intelligence. Marianne's heart thumped in her chest. She stayed composed, careful to match the casual rhythm of civilians passing by, yet inside, adrenaline coursed through her veins. The officer glanced up, suspicion flitting across his face for a brief instant. But the network's planning was flawless. Sophie's staged argument distracted him long enough for Marianne to step away, unnoticed. Meanwhile, Claudine observed from a rooftop across the street, tracking patrols and radio transmissions. Every piece of the deception had to align perfectly. A single, unexpected officer could unravel the entire operation. Her eyes caught a German patrol that had wandered too close to a dead drop. But a quick signal to Marianne redirected her steps, and the package disappeared as if it had never existed. The brilliance of the plan lay not only in the deception, but in the women themselves, ordinary faces hiding extraordinary cunning. Each false detail, each misdirected convoy, each staged event was part of a larger symphony designed to mislead the enemy while protecting countless lives. For the Germans, the intelligence was irresistible. They followed the trails, unaware that they were walking into carefully constructed illusions, chasing shadows that would never lead to the truth. Even as the operation succeeded, tension never fully dissipated. Every step, every glance carried the possibility of exposure. The network had perfected the art of misdirection, yet the stakes demanded constant vigilance. Marianne returned to the apartment, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear, relief, and exhilaration. Sophie and Claudine were already there, faces tense but triumphant, the weight of success heavy and sweet. Tonight, the network had outsmarted an enemy far stronger and better armed than themselves. They had turned ordinary streets and ordinary lives into instruments of resistance, using courage, cunning, and ingenuity to rewrite the battlefield. The Germans were deceived, their forces misdirected, their trust in ordinary civilians exploited. And yet the shadows of risk lingered. Every victory carried the reminder that discovery could strike at any moment. Operation Deception had succeeded. The enemy had been fooled, and the women had proven the power of invisibility, intelligence, and courage. But in the quiet of the night, as the city settled and the fog thickened once more, Marianne knew that the war of shadows was far from over, and the next challenge would test them in ways even this daring triumph could not predict. The early morning sun cast a pale light over Brussels, illuminating streets that seemed unchanged, yet held the memories of countless secrets. Marianne Dupont walked slowly, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle deep in her bones. The adrenaline of Operation Deception had faded, leaving only the quiet ache of what had been endured and what had been lost. The cost of victory was etched into every line of her face. Friends and colleagues had disappeared, some captured by the Germans, others lost to the uncertainty of war. Sophie had narrowly escaped interrogation at a checkpoint, her nerves frayed and her hands still trembling from the encounter. Claudine had lost a cousin who had acted as a courier, his courage paid for with his life. Every mission had been a gamble, and some had been paid in blood. Marianne carried those memories like invisible scars, reminders that even success came at an unbearable human cost. Yet, in the shadows of these sacrifices, triumph quietly endured. Some members of the network were quietly recognized after the war, honored with medals and the gratitude of nations they had never seen. Others, like Marianne, remained anonymous, their names lost to history, their bravery known only to the few who had shared it. The true power of their work lay not in fame or recognition, but in the lives they had saved, the missions they had safeguarded, and the enemy misled at every turn. Even in anonymity, their courage had left a mark. Factories destroyed by sabotage never saw the faces of those responsible. Supply lines diverted and critical troop movements disrupted, all without a single official acknowledgement. The women had operated in silence, invisible warriors whose genius lay in restraint and discretion. Their legacy was written in outcomes, in the subtle shifts that altered the course of the war without anyone ever knowing who had made them happen. The emotional toll, however, lingered long after the operations ended. Marianne often found herself waking in the middle of the night, listening for phantom footsteps outside her window, imagining threats where there were none. She had learned to carry vigilance as a constant companion, a habit born of necessity, yet one that would remain long after the war's end. Every glance at a uniformed officer, every casual inquiry from a neighbor, reminded her that the world she had lived in for so long demanded caution. Even now, and yet through the fear and fatigue, there was pride, quiet, enduring, uncelebrated pride. The network had outwitted a formidable enemy, their courage hidden in plain sight, their sacrifices unsung but profound. The story of their heroism, veiled in secrecy for decades, would one day emerge, but until then, they carried it themselves, living reminders that true courage often remained unseen. Yet its impact was immeasurable. Marianne sipped her tea, letting the silence stretch, the city alive yet indifferent below. They had survived, they had succeeded, and they had done so in shadows. The price of silence had been steep, but the women had paid it willingly, their bravery enduring long after the applause of the world had faded. Decades later, the streets of Brussels had changed, yet echoes of the past lingered in quiet corners and worn cobblestones. Marianne Dupont, now older, walked with measured steps, her eyes tracing the city she had once navigated under the shadow of occupation. The war was over, but its secrets had remained hidden for years, until history began to remember those who had operated in silence. Awards and honors were finally bestowed, but for many, recognition came too late. Some names appeared in official records, yet countless others remained anonymous, their contributions buried in archives and whispered in private memoirs. Marianne thought of Sophie, Claudine, and the many women who had risked everything, their courage invisible to the world, yet monumental in its impact. These were ordinary faces, ordinary lives, yet within them burned a brilliance and bravery that had changed the course of history. The intelligence they had delivered, the diversions they had orchestrated, and the lives they had saved were their legacy. They had operated in shadows, invisible to the enemy and the world, yet every mission was a testament to the power of determination, ingenuity, and quiet defiance. Marianne paused, feeling the weight and pride of what they had endured, and in that silence, she whispered a message to the women who had stood beside her. To those who had walked unseen in the fog of war, you were the hidden heroes. Your courage, your brilliance, your sacrifices, they were never in vain. The world may have forgotten your names, but history will never forget what you did. The sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the city with a soft, golden glow. In that light, the unseen bravery of countless women shone clearly, an enduring reminder that even in the shadows, ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.